Hello and welcome to Are You Well? Are You Well is a radio series which is going to be about how we can use the ancient wisdom or wisdom traditions of healing, particularly Ayurveda, which is an Indian system of health which has been in practice for thousands of years. And not only just as a tradition, but documented in the form of ancient medical texts such as Charaka Samhita, which dates back to 2nd century BC, and many other medical textbooks such as Ashtanga Hridaya, which is about how to live healthily, how to have daily routines, how we should adjust our lifestyle to suit with changes in seasons, how to understand an illness, development of it, diagnosing it, and how to manage those conditions. So a very systematic study of health is not something that's very new. It's not just about 200 years old. It's been there for thousands of years. But our concepts, our explorations have continuously changed. But now is the time when we know that we can sensibly and intelligently integrate ancient wisdom traditions with our modern scientific understanding for the benefit of our health. Obviously, what is not easy to implement is never going to be a part of our everyday life. And while there can be lots of very good techniques and messages that we can embrace only if we have access. And I personally think one of the easiest ways to understand how we can improve our health is through food. And particularly, I'm not talking about buying expensive, exclusive foods, but how we can use our own kitchen and understand the benefits, the advantages, the therapeutic properties of what we use on an everyday basis to prepare our food. So in that context, we have in the previous episodes looked at how we can use certain spices and understand their properties to help our gut health, to improve our immunity. And on the same note, I'd like to continue to share my passion and my understanding of how you can incorporate spices into your everyday life to help with your gut health and your immunity. We looked at cumin, and I hope that some of you have been able to get into the practice of starting your day with ginger and cumin tea, as ginger is good at gastric emptying, so it keeps our gastrointestinal tract functioning smoothly. It reduces nausea. It can also help in reducing any acidity, and it is going to help support the health of the gut mucosa. And cumin is something that many may not have thought about as using as a tea in the morning. Cumin, again, it has very high antioxidants. And since, our body is exposed to oxidative stress or free radical activity all the time, either because of the foods that we eat, our lifestyle, lack of sleep, where we live, and the fact that as we keep aging, of course, there is greater oxidative stress. So we need that kind of protection. And what better than protecting our gut, which forms the first line of defense. So cumin tea, which is a very good antioxidant, we can take a teaspoon of crushed cumin seeds and a small piece of fresh ginger, crush both of them together, add boiled water, and then let it simmer like any other tea, herbal tea that we use, and then have a cup of that in the morning. We also last time looked at coriander, the benefits of coriander as it has an anti-inflammatory effect. And also coriander, it not only reduces acidity, but it also has the ability to support proper enzymatic activity in the gut. Often what we see is sometimes acid reflux or acidity or indigestion may be because of lack of enzymes. And if the enzymes that break down food are in sufficient supply or are available, then that it can reduce chances of gastrointestinal disturbances. So again, using coriander, also using coriander for its chlorophyll, which can have a very good effect on possibly reducing any chances of heavy metal toxicity, which is quite possible in these days as we are exposed to fumes, we are exposed to many environmental pollutants. So using a handful of fresh coriander on a regular basis can give us that level of protection. We also looked at mustard seeds. Black mustard, not mustard as the one that we get in the jar, but black mustard, which is very high in sulfur compounds, and it's a very good food preservative as well because it has the ability to kill certain parasites, their eggs, and also it can act as an antitoxic as a lot of toxins do get into the production of food, particularly grains. It comes from soil, the toxins, and then gets into the grains. And so using mustard to preserve food or also to use mustard while preparing spices, they can really help in giving us another layer of protection against not exposing ourselves to potential toxins. Today, let's continue to look at the amazing world of spices, and now let's look at hing. You may or may not have heard of this particular spice, which in Hindi is called hing, H-I-N-G. Perhaps if you are going and shopping in an Indian shop or an Asian shop, mainly Indian shops, particularly South Indian shops like Sri Lankan shops, you are likely to get H-I-N-G, hing, which in English is called asafoetida. As if you can break down this word, asafoetida, what is A-S-A-F-E-T-I-D-A, F-E-T-I-D-A, fetid. Fetid is bad smell, and asafoetida, because it is a resin that's obtained from the roots of this plant, asafoetida plant, or it's a small tree, it has this very strong smell. Very rarely is there anyone who would absolutely like the smell of asafoetida when you open the jar. However, when this asafoetida is a resin, so you just take about a pinch, not more than a pinch or two, as it's so strong, and you add this to a hot oil or hot ghee when you're making spices, it brings amazing aroma. It brings about this flavor, which just makes food very delicious, savory food, of course. But, it is similar to what I would say is like garlic. Some of us, we really like garlic in our food, and some may not like the smell of garlic. And asafoetida is similar. It is a strong spice. But the advantage of asafoetida is, unlike garlic, which can leave that kind of smell even after eating. Like, for instance, if you have eaten garlic and you meet someone after 2 hours, I'm sure they can smell garlic in your breath. Whereas with asafoetida, no, nobody can smell asafoetida in your breath. So which is very different to having garlic. But asafoetida has its a strong odor. And it is a very useful spice, as it's very therapeutic. I sometimes kind of wish that, how we have taken turmeric so seriously, why haven't we taken asafoetida so seriously? Maybe because, turmeric doesn't have that kind of strong odor. It's easy to get as a powder. Whereas asafoetida, the best quality would be resin. And unfortunately, because it is expensive, it gets adulterated. Often what you find in shops are asafoetida which has been treated with wheat and processed. So if you are gluten intolerant, or if you are somebody who doesn't eat gluten, it might not be good actually to buy this powdered asafoetida. It is better to go for resin asafoetida, and hence why in my clinic I supply asafoetida from the clinic to my patients. And if any of you are interested in buying asafoetida, you always can contact me. My email is hello@murthyclinic.com, HELLO @MURTHYCLINIC.com. And I could give you more information or supply it to you, especially if you live in this part of the world, UK.
UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good. UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good.
How is asafoetida helpful? Well, the first thing is asafoetida, it enhances lipase secretion and amylase secretion. So it really helps in digesting carbohydrates or starches and also fats. So a lot of the times we may be not having the enzymes to break down the starches, to break down carbohydrates, which also results in a sudden increase in glucose levels, or any carbohydrate that we eat, of course, will release more glucose, because that's the end product of carbohydrate biochemically. But when the absorption or digestion of starches or carbohydrates is not proper, it can also dysregulate our glucose metabolism. And many times, when we eat carbohydrates, some of us do feel bloated, or we can feel that kind of heaviness. So that's often because that immediate bloating is usually because of not having sufficient enzymes to break down the foods efficiently when they are undergoing digestion. So because it enhances enzymatic production of amylase and lipase, it helps in breaking down carbohydrates and also fats. The way you want to prepare asafoetida is that you just take about a pinch, or if you're brave enough, take 2 pinches of asafoetida. You have a pan, like a frying pan, but a small frying pan, and then you turn the heat on. You have oil, preferably heat resistant oil. Obviously, olive oil is not heat resistant, so it's not always good to really heat olive oil. I always use olive oil to add to my food, to my vegetables, which are steamed as raw, instead of using olive oil to cook. But I tend to use coconut oil or ghee, which is clarified butter, or avocado oil. You can also use mustard oil if you are cooking savory foods. These are heat-resistant oils, and you can also get the cooking quality sesame oil, which is also heat-resistant. And whatever the oil that you use for your cooking, when it is hot enough, then you add a couple of pinches of asafoetida. And then it starts to kind of disintegrate like little crystals, and then it almost like dissolves as it's a resin into the oil. And to that you can add black mustard, you can add cumin, you can add fennel, you can then add your onions, your tomatoes, saute them nicely. And I always would say don't add powdered spices straight into the oil. Yes, you can, but you have to be so careful not to burn them because they are quite fragile. So what I generally do is to have these resins and seeds or seeded spices and resins first in the oil, and then to have a layer of onions or tomatoes or both. And once that's nicely sauteed, then I add powdered spices. Like my go-to powdered spices, or I always prepare a batch of cumin powder. Just dry roast cumin in a pan, and then run it through a blender, or use pestle and mortar and grind them. Again, sometimes I use the blender, but blender is not ideal if it is going to be done on a high heat. These spices, they have so many essential oils in them that you don't want to lose out on the essential oils in these spices. So as far as possible, if you can just have a pestle and mortar, if you of course have the time, you can just take a teaspoon or 2 teaspoons of these seeded spices and just beat them up with your in your pestle and mortar and crush them and break these spices and add them. That would be the best. But you also can have powders which you have stored properly, and then I would add it to the sauteed spices and onions and tomatoes. If you don't use onions, that's fine. You can use other vegetables. And then when you add these spices, then it doesn't get burnt, but it also gives that kind of flavor and brings out what is fat soluble. See, the other important aspect of knowing is spices should not just be used for adding flavor at the end of your food preparation. They need to get into your food preparation as early as you can, so that it can marinate, it can be acted upon by heat, it can mix with hot oil or hot ghee, and then start to give out its phytoconstituents, the active ingredients. And also when you later add vegetables or beans or legumes, and then you add water, and you are cooking your beans, legumes or vegetables along with these spices, that's when you get the best effect of these spices. And with the asafoetida, it also helps the liver recover from common toxins in the food. And as you will appreciate that our liver is working very hard constantly to make sure that none of the toxins get into our system. Everything that we eat, while has nutritional value, the foods, they also have potential toxins in them. For instance, let's take the example of such harmless vegetables as spinach. Spinach, while is very nutritious, it can be a good source of iron. It's a great source of fiber. But spinach also is high in oxalates. And oxalates, you probably can think, if you have heard of somebody who might have spoken about having kidney stones, which are basically oxalate crystals. So these crystalline compounds, oxalates, they are high in certain foods. And spinach is one of them. And because the plants also have to protect themselves. The plants, when they are growing, they produce these oxalates so that they are not eaten up or acted upon by other organisms. So while they have nutritious value, they also have certain toxic elements. And very interestingly, that's why those who propose more carnivore diets, I'm not an advocate of any extreme diet. I think we need to have a variety in our eating. We need to have variety in our food. We also need to eat according to what our value systems and what our body needs and what our health condition or illnesses would need in order to produce the best result. But for the sake of argument, those who are, advocates of extreme carnivore diets, they argue that potentially by eating any form of meat, one would never die immediately. There's no immediate toxic effect. But by eating plants, one can die. That's why, although there are so many plants and we have access to so much of plant-based resources, only few are used as food. Only few are edible. Not a lot of them are edible. So, that is just to demonstrate that, plants are not always harmless. Yes, these vegetables are very nutritious, but they also have these toxic substances. And you will definitely agree that we are more exposed to food than drugs, as in pharmaceutical drugs or supplements, let's say. So what we often, when we are given, let's say, a pharmaceutical drug or even a nutritional supplement, we question, are there any adverse effects? How is it going to affect me? But we don't ask this question when it comes to food. When it comes to food, we believe that we can eat anything and there won't be any adverse effect. Of course not. Because for the liver, whether you are giving food, whether you are giving a pharmaceutical drug or a nutritional supplement, it's all the same. The liver doesn't know that this is food, this is medicine, this is a drug. It will have to process everything in the same way. So liver has its own phase 1, phase 2 detoxification pathways. Many times, some of us may have a genetic predisposition where our detoxification pathways may not be highly functional. And this situation, what happens is that we may slowly accumulate the potential toxins in our food, which then starts to affect our gut. it then starts to cause inflammation. Then that would lead to inflammation in other tissues, resulting in a low-grade inflammation. And as some of you might appreciate that one of the reasons for developing chronic illnesses, especially as we age, and also one of the reasons why our functional capacity reduces, whether it's for digestion or many other functional capacity, even physical functional capacity, when there is accelerated aging. And accelerated aging is often related to a state of low-grade inflammation in that individual. And this low-grade inflammation could be because of not detoxifying the foods that we eat. You will see, in my practice, I see that even those who have a very healthy nutrition, very healthy lifestyle, may still not have the best quality of life, as in their well-being may not be optimal. They are constantly trying to be healthy, trying to be well, but then their well-being is not optimal, and they kind of question, is it because of what I'm eating, or is it because of what I'm doing? Maybe, maybe not. But importantly, we need to help the liver break down and detoxify and support the liver to become a good detoxifying organ. It is an excellent detoxifying organ by nature. But then if there are factors that are going to increase stress on the liver, we all know that although the liver is an excellent detoxifying organ, if somebody drinks alcohol too frequently in larger quantities, of course the liver is going to be affected. In a very similar way, if we are not supporting our liver consciously, we might actually be reducing the detoxification capacity of the liver, which might result in low-grade inflammation. So something like Hing asafoetida can actually help in reducing the stress on the liver caused by toxins in food. So those who are intolerant to legumes, to beans, even to such things as broccoli and spinach, I would say instead of completely avoiding them, unless there is a very strong reason or allergy. I've not come across anybody who has a strict allergy to spinach. Aversion, yes, or strict allergy to broccoli, or strict allergy to legumes and beans. Yes, we may have aversion to these, but not, I haven't come across anybody who has a strict allergy. But there could be a late onset allergy, which is what we call IgG. So in IgG immune reactions, there are antibodies which are produced, which are accumulative, and then one would be intolerant to some of these foods. Sometimes you may notice that when you eat certain foods that your energy levels drop, or you have certain symptoms of indigestion, or in about 2 or 3 days you will start to see changes in your skin, like a little rash or some itching, or even pimples, and sometimes even brain fog. So there could be some symptoms when you have a late onset allergy, or what are called IgG allergies. So they're more food intolerances. They're not actually allergies. But sometimes there may not be any symptom at all. For instance, in my own case, if I have eaten peanuts in larger quantities, then I can see certain changes in my skin. However, I don't notice any other manifestation of intolerances, and yet I know that there are certain food intolerances in me. And how do I find out? Is by doing a IgG food panel, which is a blood test that can be done, and one again has to be quite sure about what kind of blood test, because These days you find a lot of blood tests that are advertised, like in London. I see, like when you are in the tube underground, you can see a lot of genetic testing and many forms of home kit testing that are suggested, but you never know how accurate they are. And so you do need a good practitioner who is very sure about the quality of the test that's done, and also who has experience in interpreting these tests. As sometimes when you get these test results which says that, okay, these are the foods which you are perfectly okay, which are in green, and these are the foods which are not okay for you, which are in red. And if you just simply going by this list start avoiding the ones which are in red, you might actually not be taking a good decision. Because with late onset allergies, it's not that your body is always going to be intolerant to those foods. It's just that your body is currently not able to digest those foods. So it's about reintroducing those foods. And what I always advise my patients and clients is, okay, let us not completely remove those foods if they are not actually producing any noticeable adverse effects. But let's start using spices. This is where I would bring in the use of spices like hing, like cumin, coriander, turmeric, cinnamon, ginger. So when you use multiple spices and you prepare your food, for instance, spinach or broccoli with these spices, then I have noticed that it can reduce the chances of these late onset allergies or intolerances. So sometimes the adverse effect of certain high oxalate foods can be so severe in some individuals that they'll end up having very little choices when it comes to choosing their foods. And they wonder what they can eat. So when your choice of foods becomes so limited due to food intolerances, spices can be a savior, because learning how to use spices and how to cook with spices can greatly help in changing the effect or the properties of foods which otherwise would not be most suited. And again, it's because of how your liver detoxes these, how your gut actually handles this food.
UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good. UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good.
And interestingly, hing or asafoetida also has a relaxant effect. What I mean by relaxant is it's not going to relax you as in chamomile tea or lavender tea. The relaxant effect is on hollow organs. Many times there can be cramps, can be colic. For instance, increased abdominal sensitivity and cramps around the time of menstruation. And in children as well, there can be colic and cramps. And in these situations, if there is no strict structural cause for such cramps, if they are not severe, it's just a simple colic or a menstrual cramp, or sometimes you eat some food and you start to feel, it's giving you some cramps, or to reduce cramping as such, it would be good to use asafoetida because it has antispasmodic effect. So it reduces spasms. One of the best way to take asafoetida for cramps is by just taking a pinch of asafoetida in hot water. Obviously, it's not going to be the most delicious drink that you have ever drunk, but it can be an effective one. And because it is a resin, and most of these edible resins, particularly the ones which are used in herbal traditions, whether it is Western herbal tradition or Eastern herbal tradition like Ayurveda, they have anti-inflammatory properties. And anti-inflammatory properties of these resin which are edible is usually quite beneficial to protect the joints and ligaments. So as we know, once we become 40 and from then our knees start to become a little bit fragile, vulnerable, and our joints may show signs of arthritis or little pain, stiffness. There is not the same degree of flexibility or agility. So in these situations, we could use hing regularly to protect our joints. So there are many advantages when we start using these spices. I also notice that within my practice, if you are just trying to use a supplement for treating every symptom, every condition, one, it is unnecessary. Secondly, it becomes very expensive. And thirdly, it's not quite nice to be popping, even if they are natural, 15 to 20 capsules every day to keep ourselves healthy and well. But to make these natural substances, edible foods, particularly spices, as a part of our everyday cooking can be an amazing way not only to nourish, to reduce the adverse effects of foods that we eat, to get the therapeutic benefits. So I do hope that, you are going to explore hing. And hing, one needs to be very brave if you're new to using hing. But once you know how to use it, maybe watch certain YouTube, go and search on the internet how to use hing and try it out to suit your style of cooking food. And if you incorporate that into your regular eating habits, you have another tool now to take care of your health and your well-being. Let's look at curry leaves. Okay, curry leaves is not the same as curry powder, because I know most of us are familiar with curry powder because you can get them in supermarkets. And then curry powder is not just made of curry leaves. Curry powder will have some amount of curry leaves, but it will also have many other spices like turmeric, it will have cinnamon, it will have a little bit of ginger. There's absolutely nothing wrong in using curry powder. It's good to use a little bit of curry powder if you like that curry taste. However, it's not the same as curry leaves. I say this because when I suggest have curry leaves, many of my patients, they say, oh, I use curry powder. No, it's curry powder and curry leaves are different. Curry leaves are these green leaves. They're quite thick. They're a little bit dry. And they're small leaves, which are quite distinct bright green. And they can be obtained from, again, Asian shops, Indian shops. You have to ask for curry leaves. And I've found that in supermarkets, curry leaves are not available. But if you go to Indian shops, you can find curry leaves, either fresh curry leaves, which will be in the fresh produce section, or you can also find them as frozen curry leaves. If you can find them as fresh curry leaves, again, they don't last forever, much like coriander. They last a little bit longer than coriander because they're tough, but they don't last forever. So what I would do is buy a few bunches of curry leaves And I use fresh curry leaves, much like coriander. You don't need a lot of curry leaves. For instance, you might need about 6 to 8 leaves for, if you're cooking for 2 or 3 people. So that's how little curry leaves you actually need. But if you are, so therefore you will be left with a lot of curry leaves when you buy fresh. So what do you do for it not to go off? I would just spread the leaves, not the stem. You have to discard the stem, just the leaves on a tray, and then put it in the oven at 50 degrees Celsius for about 15 minutes. Of course, watch, every oven is different, even if it is 50 degrees Celsius, that the leaves actually become dried but not burnt. And once they are dried, you can use them as dried leaves, or you can powder them and you can use them. I also have noticed that you can get curry leaf powder, which is even good because you can use curry leaf powder, about half a teaspoon in your cooking. What is the benefit of using curry leaves? Okay, of course it gives you that nice aroma. Okay, as I've been emphasizing, it's not about the aroma. Aroma is good, but it's about the therapeutic properties of these. So one of the important properties of curry leaves is it improves insulin sensitivity. And I must admit, in my practice, what I see with many of my patients, including me, is we constantly have to work towards improving our insulin sensitivity. Because, we, no matter how keen we are on our exercising or physical activity, still our lives are fairly sedentary. And we need to make an effort to be physically active, as many of our jobs are not so physical. And then our food, which is not so nutrient dense, it's possibly more caloric dense but not nutrient dense. And if we are not those who eat a lot of vegetables, I mean non-root vegetables, then also there is less fiber available. And if we are into eating grains, particularly refined grains, more than necessary, then all of this will slowly contribute towards developing insulin resistance. And insulin resistance is now implicated in metabolic syndrome like high blood pressure, particularly diabetes, and also if there is a genetic predisposition or familial history of Alzheimer's and diabetes, it's very important to keep our insulin sensitivity good. Is there a way to measure insulin sensitivity? To be very honest, it's not very easy to measure insulin sensitivity. We can measure insulin levels in the blood, and we can measure the glucose levels, fasting or random, and we can interpret or infer whether there's a possibility of insulin resistance. But however, to exactly know if there is insulin resistance, as how much of insulin is pushed, how much of glucose is pushed into the cell by insulin, how are the insulin receptors, it's actually very difficult to measure, and maybe it's not always necessary either. However, but if we understand that insulin resistance can contribute towards many metabolic conditions, and to keep our insulin sensitivity in a good state, then you probably will appreciate why having certain spices and herbs, like in this instance, curry leaf, could help in giving us that protection of increasing insulin sensitivity. You will know that, those who are diabetic, if it's gone for several years, initially they might be on oral antidiabetics, and over a period of time, they might need insulin because they'll have developed insulin resistance. So insulin resistance is a very common thing that can happen even in non-diabetics, and often curry leaves in traditional Indian practices is also kind of used as something which will help in losing weight. And I believe that's also because it can help in insulin sensitivity. Therefore, you are able to have better glucose metabolism, which will help in better weight management. And how do you use it? Yeah, again, like when you are making spices, because this is a bit tough. Unlike coriander, which you always add at the end of your food, with curry leaves, you would have to add it to hot oil. So you have this hot oil, like how you add your hing or cumin. You're going to, again, just take a few leaves of a few curry leaves, and then you're going to add them, fresh curry leaves, into this hot oil. Of course, because there is moisture in it, there's a bit of a splattering sound, and don't burn it. And that you can add it to or cook that along with your vegetables, legumes, and pulses, beans, green mung beans. It will be fantastic. It also has an anti-inflammatory effect on the gastrointestinal tract. So often, because of bad diet or long-term stress or lack of nutrients, that the gut can have inflammation. You may not have signs of inflammation as in diarrhea or constipation or irritable bowel syndrome or acidity. But you may, in many instances, irritable bowel syndrome is very common. Either it can be constipation dominant or it can be diarrhea dominant. And if you are not going to the toilet on a regular basis, if there's bloating, if there's heaviness, then all of this indicates possible inflammation in the gut. And clearly, anything that can help in reducing such inflammation in the gut would be helpful. So therefore, using many of the spices that I have just talked about, and also using curry leaves, can be quite helpful in addressing this inflammation. And interestingly, studies have shown that curry leaves, they can reduce total cholesterol. So again, if you are thinking about all those metabolic risk factors, which are like cholesterol, weight, glucose or sugar levels, curry leaves can be quite helpful in addressing those factors. Obviously, if you have dyslipidemia, which is out of control, you would have to see your doctor, your practitioner, who would help you with it. But the therapeutic property of curry leaves is that it has the tendency or ability to reduce total cholesterol. And another very important property of curry leaves is that it reduces cholinesterase activity. So what is cholinesterase activity? In fact, when cholinesterase activity is increased, it can result in cognitive impairment, particularly reduced memory or memory loss. So we are really talking about a condition like dementia, Alzheimer's. And in Alzheimer's disease, there is increased cholinesterase activity in these individuals. And the way how certain treatments are given in dementia are also to reduce cholinesterase activity. So is there something that we can find which is natural in reducing cholinesterase activity? Yes. curry leaves. So curry leaves, if you are taking them on a regular basis, especially as adults, then you are reducing cholinesterase activity. So you probably have a greater chance of maintaining good memory. So I find these unusual spices, unusual for our Western world, but quite common in Indian culinary practices. Since we live in a global world and these are available, why not actually take interest in them and start using them? And finally, curry leaves have a particular phytoconstituent called mahanimbin. Mahanimbin is a natural chemical compound in curry leaves, which has antibacterial and anthelmintic properties. So it can act as an antibacterial on the gut, and also it can help in acting on intestinal parasites. Many times, as children or also as adults, especially if there's a history of a lot of travel to those countries where parasites are quite common, then having something like curry leaves can help. And antibacterial property, we might have bacterial overgrowth, particularly in the small intestine, which is called SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. One would need natural antimicrobials. Of course, when there is not always a need for an antibiotic unless it is a strict infection, but one would need a broad spectrum natural antimicrobial, much like how we use oregano oil or even rosemary. These are olive leaf extract or garlic. They are all antimicrobial. Similarly, curry leaf is a very good antimicrobial. Curry leaves can be used in our cooking to keep our gut devoid of this microbial overactivity or bacterial overactivity. So I do hope that, the spices that I've just shared with you are something that you're going to explore. It has inspired you. Spices always inspire me and they always fascinate me, but it's a matter of actually using them. So go to the shops, identify the spices, bring them home and start to use them in your cooking. We shall continue exploring the amazing wisdom of Ayurveda and how we can apply that in our modern day lifestyles for health and well-being in the series of Ayurveda. Are You Well? And thanks for listening to Are You Well? And hope to speak to you all next week and stay connected. Thank you.